Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Spotlight PA panel discussion on Pennsylvania's gubernatorial race. I'm Kathleen Pavelko, Major Donor Advisor to Spotlight PA and CEO Emerita of WITF Public Media, which is one of Spotlight's founding media partners. I'm also a Spotlight donor for a very long time. We Pennsylvania voters are just weeks away from electing our next governor, the most powerful public official in our state. To help you make an informed vote, two Spotlight reporters are here this evening to talk about who the candidates are and how their administrations would affect you. The candidates they will discuss are Republican Doug Mastriano, Democrat Josh Shapiro, Green Party candidate Christina DiGiulio, Libertarian Matt Hackenberg, and Keystone Party candidate Joe Solosky. For those of you who are new to our work or programming, Spotlight PA is an independent, nonpartisan news organization. We produce investigative and public service journalism about the state legislature and statewide issues. And during election season, we report on who the candidates are, what they propose, if that may be different from their views or actions in the past, and how elections are conducted at a time of conflict and confusion about the process. How do we do this? We do this with your financial support. The days of newspapers supported by advertising alone are long gone. But the day of quality news supported by those who read it and value it has arrived. If you're already a member, thank you. You are among a growing number of people making Spotlight PA's work sustainable. I'm proud to be among those donors. And if you are not yet a member, please consider joining us now at whatever contribution level works for you. So I'm going to pause here for a moment and ask you to please make a gift at spotlightpa.org/donate. That's spotlightpa.org/donate. With your support, we can power some of the most powerful journalism in Pennsylvania and ensure that we can continue to provide it at no cost. Now, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Spotlight PA reporters Katie Meyer and Stephen Caruso to take it from here. But I will say only that I've followed their work closely. They are knowledgeable, they are dogged, and they are talented in their reporting. Katie, over to you.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. And thank you to everybody who is tuning in tonight. We're excited to talk a little bit about the governor's race. It is a race it's been one of the most interesting ones I've covered in Pennsylvania. So the way that we're going to do this evening's presentation, Stephen and I have broken the different categories of issues down into different slides. We're going to show you a PowerPoint, and we're going to run through some of the major things that the governor is going to have power over, the major differences between the candidates. And then we're going to turn it over to all of you to ask your questions. We've gotten a bunch of questions already, so we'll be reading some of those, but please feel free to submit your questions as you listen, as things come to mind, and we would love to hear from you. Just a couple of the things we're going to be focusing on because there's a lot. The governor has very broad power over, a lot in Pennsylvania, but the key issues as we see them in this race include abortion. The candidates have extremely different positions on that. Election administration, things like how schools and the content that teachers teach in schools should be regulated, and a lot more regulations on the oil and gas industry, that kind of thing. So without further ado, I am going to pull up a presentation that we've got for you, and then Stephen and I are going to begin running through some of the major areas that we think people are probably going to want to hear about. So first of all, to start, Steve, let's give a little bit of a primer on these candidates. You want to tell me about Doug Mastriano, the first guy we've got up here?
Yeah, so Doug Mastriano is a state senator from Franklin County. He first came to prominence after winning a special election in 2019. In 2020, opposing the COVID-19 pandemic mediation efforts of Governor Tom Wolf. He did a lot of live videos encouraging people, telling them to keep the faith when everyone was in lockdown, and then started leading protests outside the Capitol and became a vocal opponent of business closures, of mask mandates, of vaccine mandates, and the like. Since then, also in 2020, Later that year, he became one of the most vocal supporters of President Trump's attempts to subvert the 2020 election. He shared some data points claiming factually incorrect things about, say, the number of mail-in ballots requested. He was at January 6th when Trump supporters tried to storm the Capitol and interrupt the counting of the certification of electoral college votes. In fact, he bust some of his supporters there. And now he is running for governor on a platform that builds on some of these things he's talked about. Still anti COVID measures, talking about personal freedom. Walk as free people is his big motto, which is taken from a Bible verse. And also saying, he supports election integrity. He wants, to get rid of mail-in voting, less regulations, and on a social conservative agenda of like banning abortion, for instance.
Yes. And then we've got Josh Shapiro, a Democrat. He has had a couple major positions during his time in Pennsylvania government. He started out as a state representative from Montgomery County, then he became a Montgomery County commissioner, and then was elected attorney general in 2016. I think notably with Shapiro, he's always been known as a good politician, a person who is adept at politics. And that's, won him friends and people who don't like him because of that. He has long been sort of seen as wanting to be in higher office. He was able to run unopposed in the Democratic primary for governor, which is, I think, really notable. It's very rare, especially in an open seat, for that to happen. And it's one of those things that takes a lot of political finagling and positioning. Some of the things he's best known for, in 2018, he and his office released a grand jury investigation on sexual abuse in the Catholic churches of Pennsylvania, most of the dioceses in Pennsylvania. He also opposed a lot of lawsuits in 2020 that sought to throw out tranches of ballots in different categories that Republicans mostly were challenging. Some of his priorities as governor would be to be the same type of bulwark that Governor Tom Wolf has been against the Republican-controlled legislature. So he said he would veto any attempt to restrict abortion, for instance, any attempt to restrict mail voting. Also wants to route more money to public schools, has been a pretty vocal proponent of getting more money through a fair funding formula for public schools, wants stricter gun laws, and we could go on, but we also have a couple other candidates here. These are our third-party candidates. You may not have heard as much about these folks, but Steve, you want to tell us a little bit?
Yeah, and so all of these candidates will be on the ballot. Christine DeGuglio with the Green Party is a former chemist and environmental activist. She's most known. She's been very opposed to Mariner East 2 pipeline, which goes from Western PA to Eastern PA, bringing fracked natural gas to the coast and for export. Matt Hackenberg is the Libertarian Party candidate. He's a computer engineer and a former National Guardsman. And then Joe Solosky with the Keystone Party. He's an accountant. The Keystone Party is a new third party that just started. It's a mix of some former libertarians, some independents. Solosky himself, I think, ran for state treasurer in 2020. But they're a new group, and they have I believe, all three of these groups have these three candidates on the ballot, and some of them also have local legislative candidates too, who you can see on your ballot.
Yeah, and we should say too, the Keystone Party, it was an offshoot, again, as Steve said, it's mostly libertarians, but it's mainly libertarians who thought that that party had become too extreme or too, niche. And so they were trying to make it a little bit more mainstream. So then we get into one of the many areas that we thought were notable in this election administration. I'll start this one because I've been writing about it this week. So the governor has a lot of broad authority over administering and certifying elections. I think that's important to top line. So the way that an election is certified in Pennsylvania is kind of a threefold process. First, counties, because elections are really administered on the county level. All the nitty-gritty stuff that happens in an election happens there. A county will certify that its election results are accurate. Then the Secretary of State will get all of the county certifications, review them, and certify that, yes, they believe that the count is accurate too. And I should say that those certifications now come after two different audits. One is a statistical audit that the state's been doing for a long time, where you take a sample, a random sample of votes, and you just check it. The next is a risk limiting audit, which is more involved, but basically it's, some number of votes that you then check against, what you expect to get from a certain number of votes. And you can check to see if the count is valid that way. So those two audits happen. And then the governor has to sign off on the certification, basically saying, this is our slate of electors in Pennsylvania. Now, if it's a federal election, they can be certified on that level, say for president. So the thing that, is important here is that Mastriano has said that there was fraud in the 2020 election, and he's pledged to install a Secretary of State that has similar views. So that person would certify the election results, then Mastriano would sign off on that certification if he were to win as governor. And this has been a topic of conversation for a long time. It's sort of an open question of, okay, if there is an election where Mastriano says he disagrees with the results, what would he do in that case? What could he do? It's a little bit of uncharted territory, but that's something, that I think is important to note in his gubernatorial campaign. Separate from that, he also wants to ban mail voting, Act 77, which legalized mail voting broadly in Pennsylvania. And then on the other hand, Shapiro has said, again, this kind of idea of him being a bulwark against the GOP-controlled legislature, that's how he wants to frame himself. He said he would veto any attempts to restrict mail voting. He's got a suite of election reforms that broadly would make it easier to vote, would make voting more accessible. So things like automatic voter registration. So as soon as you move to Pennsylvania or turn 18, you're registered to vote unless you opt out. Same day registration, if you want to register to vote the same day that you do vote, you can do that. Early voting, broad early voting, which is different from being able to drop your mail ballot off early. That would be in-person early voting, which a lot of states have. A lot of this stuff does exist already in other states. And he's also, this has been one of the boondoggles in attempts to change election law in Pennsylvania, is voter ID. Democrats have generally opposed it. Republicans have generally pushed for it. Shapiro has said he would be open to requiring some form of voter ID. Now, Democrats haven't often put out a specific proposal for what that means. What I've heard is that it would have to be something that happens in concert with other things that Republicans would need to kind of give some ground on, like automatic voter registration, something like that. But that's a general sense of the landscape for these two candidates. Anything you would add on that, Steve?
Yeah, I'll add just for one thing I think worth noting is with some of the third party candidates, I believe DeGuglio and also I believe some of the others have advocated for ranked choice voting, some sort of changes to how Pennsylvanians elect, because right now we most elections in America are conducted in first past the post, so that's basically just the person who gets the most votes wins. Doesn't matter how many that is. If it's a 3-person race, it doesn't matter. There's just a general, it kind of forces things into a binary. So most of the third parties have advocated for changing that to different forms of voting, proportional representation that might allow for more third parties like their own to sort of break in.
Yeah, absolutely. And we get into education. And Steve, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so on education, what we have seen is that I think everyone is kind of trying to find the right notes for them. Shapiro has said that he supports all of the above. He wants more funding for public schools. That's something he's always been clear on. That's something he would agree with outgoing Democratic Governor Tom Wolf on. But he's also in recent weeks said that he does support school choice. He supports charter schools, more scholarships for private schools. That's something that usually Republicans and other conservatives have advocated for. But Shapiro has basically said, all the above. Look, I think we need more funding for public schools. I think we should also make sure people don't like the schools near them, that they have an option to go into something else. And Mastriano had, throughout the campaign, like most Republicans, it almost been one of these issues that I think every Republican in the field was agreed upon, is they support more access to private schools, more access to charter schools, school choice. So Mastriano's been clear about that. And he also proposed in a radio interview reducing public school funding to make that happen by basically giving access, giving everybody basically scholarships to parents who have kids, to basically let them fund schooling their own way, with the idea that that will let them make the choice they want for their kid. He has since tried to, I think, backtrack on that when some analysis has come out from the teachers union that showed how much money that could potentially lose rural school districts or suburban school districts. But I think what is clear is that pretty much both Mastriano and Shapiro support school choice in some way. It's basically going to be a matter of degree and how much they emphasize it. And I think the other thing that we can say here is that Mastriano has spent a lot of time talking about like actual plans in school or lesson plans in school. He's criticized the idea of like gender theory or critical race theory. That's a term that I think Republicans and conservatives have used to basically refer to, I think, a lot of history lessons on social justice that they oppose. But Mastriano said he banned that from executive order on his first day in office. He said same thing with like any lessons around gender he'd want to ban from executive order first day. Shapiro has, for the most part, sort of not directly addressed the issue, but has said that he does want to get 2 more parents onto the school's Board of Education to increase their voice in schooling. The Board of Education is the national or the state board that sort of looks over lessons plans, looks over, the state standards for how kids are taught. Another thing we can throw in education, because schools are basically funded in large part by property taxes, also state funding, also some other sources, but property taxes are one of their main forms of funding. Mastriano has said he would like to work toward eliminating property tax. He said he set up a task force to do that. This has been an issue that's been talked about in Harrisburg for a while and hasn't gone through, but Mastriano has advocated for it. Shapiro has said he wants to focus on just expanding a rent rebate program or rent or tax rebate program that is for low-income seniors who are struggling on their payments, that basically helps give them money back to help afford, rising costs. Another thing we can add to is that school choice is also something that's backed by both Joe Selesky and Matt Hackenberg, the Keystone and the Libertarian parties candidates, respectively.
Yes. Now, the economy. This is one of those broad ones, but we'll run through it quickly because I do want to get to questions. Both of the major candidates have said the state does need to reduce its corporate net income tax. Lawmakers did agree to cut it in the 2022 budget deal. That's been a topic of conversation, as Stephen said, kind of like property taxes. For many years, people kind of agree Pennsylvania's corporate net income tax is high. The question is, Democrats have often wanted to couple that with, for example, combined reporting, which closes this loophole where companies can, shelter some of their profits in other states. So, that's always been, it's not just this one issue, it's a push and pull of which suite of issues you support on corporate taxation. Shapiro supports raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Mastriano has voted against wage increases. There was a vote to $9.50 in 2019. He was against that. Currently, Pennsylvania's minimum wage is $7.50 an hour. Mastriano has made regulations a big centerpiece of his campaign. He says he wants to slash 55,000 regulations within his first year in office. I don't know what all of those regulations are, but he has been especially he has talked most about regulations, for instance, on the oil and gas industries. He wants to make it easier to drill for natural gas in Pennsylvania. Shapiro wants state innovation hubs that focus on research and development for things like manufacturing, healthcare research. And then on the economy for the third-party candidates, Hackenberg, the Libertarian, he said he wants to encourage the use of precious metals and cryptocurrency instead of US dollars. And Selesky wants to keep the minimum wage to $7.25 an hour. Actually, I was wrong, $7.25 an hour, not $7.50. And he also wants to reduce corporate taxes. And then on the environment, Steve, you want to take that one? I'm getting into some.
Yeah, so on the environment, obviously also a big issue. A lot of this is going to come down to RGGI, which is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is a program that Governor Tom Wolf decided to enter Pennsylvania in 2019 through an executive order, and that Pennsylvania is about to enter, just caught up in a few legal challenges still. So this would put a tax on carbon released by power plants in Pennsylvania. And so it would force them to basically pay for every ton of carbon they release, and carbon is what contributes to climate change and changing weather patterns, higher temperatures, all of that. So RGGI has been opposed by business groups and trade unions. It's been supported by environmental groups. Mastriano said he would pull Pennsylvania out of RGGI, calling it a job killer and saying it will increase energy costs. He's called climate change fake science before. He's also then supported just trying to turn Pennsylvania into a huge energy producer, coal, natural gas, in particular fossil fuels. And he always advocates that as a way to bring prosperity back to the state. He's wanted to exempt drillers from the PA's corporate net income tax. He wants to allow drilling in allow drilling and he also wants to make it easier for drillers to get permits. Shapiro has sort of been, as I mentioned, trade unions oppose Reggie, particularly the ones that represent workers in these in coal-fired power plants or service these plants. Those are typically Democratic allies. Shapiro has sort of tried to walk a line of saying that he is unsure if Reggie satisfies his needs. He's talked a lot about wanting to bring everyone back to the table to talk about Reggie and how it could be implemented better, how it could be done to try and not to keep people in jobs, make sure energy prices don't rise. I've interviewed him and tried to get a straight answer, and he usually just falls back on this idea that like it just wasn't done well, and I think we can do it better, and I have different priorities as Governor Wolf. He has, but Shapiro has also, when it comes to the environment, it's been an issue on some levels where his office has been really aggressive. He's actually had a grand jury investigate fracking in rural parts of the state. Charged some companies for not reporting spills. He's also brought cases against the company making Mariner East 2 pipeline. He has basically argued for all of the above. He doesn't want to necessarily get rid of fossil fuels, but he also wants to encourage more renewable energy, nuclear, solar, wind, coal, gas, all of it. Josh Shapiro said he supports, and he argues it's a false choice to say you can't have one or the other. And then, the last candidate we can also add here is Christine DeGiulio, the Green Party candidate. She has advocated for the state to make massive investments into renewable energy and green energy. And she's wanted to see a transfer because of basically state tax credits, exemptions, or grants or whatever that go to fossil fuels and give that to renewable energy to allow them to help expand in the state.
Absolutely. Now to health. So a couple different things here. Mastriano, one of the things that was the maker of his political rise was the COVID-19 pandemic, and specifically his opposition to COVID-19 restrictions. Shapiro defended many of those restrictions in court, and has also since Shapiro has tried to distance himself from some of those mandates. And, as COVID has slowed, as the virus has kind of become more of a part of life. Shapiro has said he supports Medicaid expansion. Mastriano has backed work requirements, but hasn't really said much else on that. Shapiro says he'll veto bills that restrict abortion access. Hasn't said how he'll handle bills to expand access, but the thrust of his position has been that Pennsylvania's current laws, which basically are laws that are designed to allow abortion up to viability. The general sense from Shapiro is that he supports the current laws. Now, Mastriano, on the other hand, one of the first bills he sponsored when he got to Harrisburg was a 6-week abortion ban. He has said he does not support exceptions for rape, incest, or a situation in which the life of a parent is at risk. Basically, he does support a total ban because those 6-week abortion bans, while they're often called heartbeat bills, things like that, that's often before somebody knows that they're pregnant. They're functionally bans in many cases. Recreational marijuana, Mastriano opposes legalizing it. He's voted against, changes to the state's medical marijuana program. Shapiro used to oppose marijuana legalization. A lot of Democrats used to. He backs it now. Tide has changed on that for the party. All of the third-party candidates actually also support marijuana decriminalization or legalization. And now on to LGBTQ plus rights and issues. Steve, you want to run through that one?
Yeah. So, this is an issue where I think the candidates are really, another one of those issues where there's a very strong divide between the two candidates. Mastriano has said that he'd ban transgender girls from playing school sports, like women's sports in particular, through an executive order on his first day in office. Shapiro has argued that is basically legislative efforts on that amount to taxpayer-funded bullying of trans girls and teens. I think it's worth noting that it's really hard to get any statistics on the amount of trans girls playing school sports. The PIAA, which is the state's agency that oversees interscholastic sports, doesn't keep those statistics and hasn't been able to give us numbers when we've asked. And also I think I mentioned this earlier, but Mastriano has also promised for an executive order to ban teaching about gender theory in schools through an executive order as well. Josh Shapiro, meanwhile, he says that he supports expanding state non-discrimination law to cover employment and housing for LGBTQ individuals. Right now, it is legal under state law to fire someone or deny someone housing if they're gay, if they're trans, depending on something like that. And that's currently a hole in state law. And Doug Mastriano has said that he would oppose such an expansion. I think it's also worth noting, according to a survey sent out by the PA Family Institute, which is a social conservative think tank, they've both Joe Solosky and Matt Hackenberg have agreed that they would not support such an expansion. And what we can also say is that Josh Shapiro has said that he would support a ban on conversion therapy, which is claims to change a person's sexual orientation or gender identity for minors. And I'm not sure if we were able to get to Doug Mastriano's position on that, but like I said, I think this is an issue where there's really clear divide between the candidates.
Yeah. And then we had government reform. Both candidates, this is Mastriano and Shapiro, the major party candidates, they support legislation that would prevent lawmakers and public officials from accepting gifts. So there's a point of common ground. Mastriano supports pay reductions for lawmakers. He wants to get rid of some perks like car rentals that have been controversial. He supports term limits for school board members. Shapiro, broadly against term limits. He thinks it empowers lobbyists instead of lawmakers, and instead of people who elect lawmakers. He wants more frequent reporting of campaign finances. They're not that frequent now in Pennsylvania. He also supports limits on giving up to campaigns. Pennsylvania has no limits on how much like a PAC can give to a campaign. Although he has said that's kind of a, there's, tricky parts of that issue because there would still be, these dark money groups which can take in unlimited funds. They act as political entities. They don't have to disclose their donors. He would want limits specifically on the ways that they can influence politics and campaigns. So that is just kind of a sampling of those positions. There's plenty more. And then you want to just run through quick the campaign finance positions of the two campaigns, Steve?
Of course, you give that to me, Katie, my favorite subject. No, very funny to hear Josh Shapiro could support campaign finance laws because he set the single election record for spending with $42 million roughly. He's already raised more than $50 million. So all of this is, like pretty much records for Pennsylvania. So Shapiro, most of his money has come from national Democratic groups or donors. We've highlighted this previously on Spotlight PA. About half of his money has come from out of state, about half of it is in state. Other big donors are public and private sector unions, so AFSCME, SEIU, and trade unions I mentioned, carpenters, electricians, plumbers, Teamsters. And also trial lawyers are a huge donor to Josh Shapiro as well, both of them individually and their interest groups who are big money donors to Democratic politics in the state. Mastriano, meanwhile, he's raised only about $5 million, mostly from smaller donors, mostly from in-state, but a lot of the institutional support that we typically would see for an important open race like this has not come to Mastriano. Like a national Republican gubernatorial group, the Republican Governors Association, they've specifically stayed out of this race. They've tried to basically argue it's unwinnable with Mastriano as a candidate. Other big institutional donors haven't been providing Mastriano money from other groups like business groups in Pennsylvania, or Jeff Yass, who's a big mega donor who supports school choice in Pennsylvania. The one thing worth noting is Mastriano, of that $5 million, about $1 million of it came from an Illinois GOP mega donor, Dick Uihlein, and his wife. They're known for funding very conservative outsider Republicans, and they also donate a lot of money to a group that did end up like feeding into the January 6th storming of the Capitol. And then the third party candidates, they've just haven't really raised a lot of money, so negligible sums that I don't have much else to add on.
Yeah. And then I will now stop sharing my screen. As you can see there's way more coverage, way more detailed coverage that you can read at spotlightpa.org/elections. There really is a ton of good stuff in there. I recommend you check it out if you haven't. But now, Stephen, I would love to turn it over to some of our listeners or viewers, I guess. I'm still just checking through some of these questions that we've gotten. But I would like to start actually with one that came in earlier today. 'Cause
Mhm.
I thought this was kind of interesting, and we hadn't touched on this on our panel yet, but this is from Danielle, or no, yes, this is from Danielle. What have the candidates said about changes to our law enforcement under their administrations? So that's one. Well, I guess I'll turn it to you. Anything come to mind for you for that, Steve?
Yeah, so Josh Shapiro, as Attorney General, is the Commonwealth's top cop, as it's kind of put in shorthand. He has talked a lot about the opioid crisis. His office has tried to get drugs off the street. He's also opposed, for example, he's been supportive of some measures. He's also been opposed to, say, like safe injection sites, which is something that's been tried in Philly, where basically you would allow someone to inject drugs or do drugs under medical supervision. Doug Mastriano has focused a lot on opioids as well. He's tried to talk about it. He's actually has legislation moving in the General Assembly right now that would try and expand sort of the way information shared between law enforcement and health authorities to try and basically be able to track down if there's like a bad batch of drugs that has fentanyl in it. And he's also supported stricter penalties for people who are caught dealing fentanyl. So, and when it comes to policing overall, Shapiro actually he helped negotiate a deal that got a statewide policing database of basically cops' disciplinary records. It's private in the sense that we can't necessarily access it, the general public or reporters, but it's meant to be used by police agencies to make sure not an officer who has like a long disciplinary rap sheet. And that passed the General Assembly in 2020 after Shapiro helped broker a deal with the state FOP. So, when it comes to that, Shapiro, it should be noted too, also has endorsements of pretty much of all of the state's or almost all of the state's big law enforcement unions. I believe the statewide FOP just didn't endorse in this race. Mastriano hasn't been able to get them, and one FOP official said when talking about the endorsement, some of that had to do with Mastriano's position on unions. So, when it comes to law enforcement and policing, it's sort of it's been an interesting topic in the race.
Yeah, well, and I'll just say too, one of the through lines, I think, in a lot of the races, including the governor's race, has been that Republicans have sought to, kind of put the Democratic candidate, whoever it is, in the same box as Larry Krasner, Philadelphia's DA, who's very progressive. He's been very anti-incarceration. And Shapiro specifically, Mastriano has done that. He's kind of likened the two. They're very different, Shapiro and Krasner. They've clashed before. There was a kerfuffle, a Harrisburg-related kerfuffle, because a bill had passed that would give Shapiro additional jurisdiction over prosecuting gun crimes in Philadelphia, which was Krasner's jurisdiction. He actually hasn't used that additional power very much yet, but that was a point of contention between the two, as were just, other philosophical differences in how to carry out, criminal justice and how to handle those things. So yeah, the two are pretty different. I would say you have a harder time like painting Shapiro as a Larry Krasner type than you do a lot of Democrats. And then let's see. David Martins asks, what do the latest polls show? I asked that one because I do think it's kind of significant. I mean, this has been a race, and I think Stephen and I are of one mind on this, but like, I don't love to just look at polls, but polling averages can be useful. This race has not been particularly close, or it doesn't look that way right now. Of course, there have been major polling errors before. But yeah, Steve, any take on polls?
Yeah, I think if you're going to use a poll, you want to use a polling average. So far, that does show a wide lead. I think we've also seen a lot of misses, particularly since like 2018 or 2016 polling. Doesn't necessarily mean it's useless. It can't be your only data point. I also, there are a lot of people who are, for a lot of reasons, who will also tell me all the reasons why they think that Mastriano has a good shot. A lot of it has to do with grassroots be a quiet effect of people who are not picking up their phones in rural PA. I've also seen some signs and heard some people concerned about low voter enthusiasm among Democratic groups. So, but all of that's just basically throwing extra nuance onto a polling average that shows a wide lead for Josh Shapiro right now.
Yeah. We've got a question from Gary that I think is interesting. While acknowledging that Mastriano and many members of the Pennsylvania General Assembly share similar views, do you think that a Shapiro victory will provide coattails for Democratic candidates for the General Assembly? Great question, Gary. I would say, broad brush, I don't know if I would say Mastriano, even in the General Assembly, which is pretty conservative, especially the House, he's more conservative than many members. I think a lot of them would say, like, I'm not the same as Doug Mastriano. But that part of the point is taken. I would say, and Steve, definitely jump in on this, that the effect Shapiro might have on the down ballot races, I think, is less than the effect that we will see from redistricting. We got new legislative maps earlier this year. They are much better for Democrats, especially the House map. The Senate map, not quite so much, but the House map is much better for Democrats than the previous maps had been. And if you see a big change in House representation, that's probably the biggest reason why. Anything, Steve, on that?
We will have more fine reporting on the legislative races coming next week, Spotlight PA. But I mean, a preview would be that I think Katie is right that the legislative redistricting is something to really look for in terms of changing. When it comes to coattails, I think I just saw some stories on this, but look, let's go to just the really easy evidence of 2020, where Joe Biden won and Josh Shapiro won re-election as Attorney General, and then down ballot, a incumbent Democrat lost for state treasurer in Joe Torcella. Republicans flipped the Auditor General's office, and they actually gained some ground in the legislature. Ticket splitting is still a thing in Pennsylvania. We've seen really good evidence for that in 2020. I feel like we even maybe saw some marginal evidence for that in 2021 in judicial races, like kind of mixed outcomes. So, I think Democrats are going to be going really hard after trying to draw comparisons between Mastriano and legislative Republicans. I think legislative Republicans are going to do everything in their power to say, look, we are not Doug Mastriano, we are our own people, and these are all 253 individual races.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have a question here, an anonymous question. Have any of the candidates mentioned anything about changes to the court system and elder abuse? On the court question, I would say, yeah, Mastriano has sought to, especially when it comes to elections, take power from the courts and from the administration and put it in the hands of the legislature. He has suggested, I think we mentioned this when we were running through some issues, but creating a new commission that would, what was the thing he was going to do? He wanted to pass a law that would have required legislative approval for any court decision that affects election results, or not even election results, just like election administration rules. And so that's notable, I think. Broadly, just among Republicans, there has been this push to create judicial districts, which would really, really change the makeup of our appellate courts in Pennsylvania. It would make them much more like political seats, because right now Pennsylvania elects judges on a statewide basis, and then they have to go up for retention. This would have them be elected in districts like lawmakers are. So you would have to appeal to a much more specific group of voters. Anything on that? Or I don't have anything on elder abuse. Do you have anything on that, Steve?
I do not. Apologies.
And we can check into that, and we will look into it after. Any other questions that we've got coming in now? Yes. Intellectual disability programs are on the verge of collapsing due to poor wages for the direct support professionals set by the state. Are any of the candidates speaking about this issue? Have any of them talked about increased Medicaid support or funding for these programs? That's from Gary. Steve, anything on that?
Yeah, so speaking broadly, I don't know if any of the candidates have spoken directly to this issue, which is an important one. I've covered it in Harrisburg. There is a deep wait list for people who have disabilities, intellectual disabilities, to get basically state funding for AIDS, and they are entitled to this due to Supreme Court precedent and also just the way the federal government funds medical care. But but a lot of this also goes through the state because the state matches the funding. So the state has the ability to set, as the questioner noted, like pay rates. All this to say, though, this is a debate that goes back to how much should the state spend on social services. I think we talked about in our question about Medicaid and healthcare, that is a main cost driver for the state. It is a big part of the budget, is making sure that Pennsylvanians who are entitled to medical care get that care, trying to drive down the amount of people who are reliant on state healthcare has been something that Republicans push with work requirements, for instance. Not that work requirements necessarily apply here, but I do just want to point out that this is going to be a big issue, I think, for the next governor. So there's obviously this shortfall in terms of getting resources to people with intellectual disabilities. There's also, as Spotlight PA has noted, our colleague Ed Mahan, there are about 500,000 people who right now are on Medicaid and are going to potentially lose those benefits because of a loss in federal disaster funding for expanded Medicaid rolls. So when the next governor comes in, this is going to be one of the top priorities they have to face, is sort of how is the state, once the federal funding from pandemic response starts going down, from all these stimuluses, how are they going to balance the state's books? Really truly going to be one of the most important things I think Spotlight covers in the coming months.
Yeah. We are going to be wrapping up relatively soon. So if you have any questions you want us to hit as we do that, please send them in now. There was one that I wanted to get to, and then I think I lost. Oh, yes. This is a sort of wonky question. But this is from Joanna S. And Steve, I feel like this is up your alley. This is about fixing procedural rules on January 3rd, this upcoming January, when the new legislative session starts, so that all legislators can have a fair chance to get a bill passed and that bipartisan solutions can get a vote. Thank you, Joanna, for that question. And so it was asked as in asked to the candidates. We don't have positions on that, but Steve, what would you say on that? I would say, governors don't have a ton of power over the procedural rules of the General Assembly, but these rules are very, very important. Yeah, so tell us a little bit about that if you could.
They are. Oh man, where to start? And I could talk for probably the next 15 minutes, so I will try to keep it quicker for the nice people. Look, the governor won't have a lot of say on legislative rules. That's typically just the legislature's domain, setting their own rules. I don't know of a governor who's ever waded that deeply into something like that, at least in recent history. But I also think that it is worth noting that Shapiro, for instance, in one of the last times there was a pretty major legislative rule change, was actually a state representative from Montgomery County. He did, without wading through all of the backdoor dealings, but Shapiro basically helped negotiate a compromise that got a bunch of rules changed and put a Republican speaker in with a Democratic majority. So I would just say that I think Josh Shapiro has also run on this idea that he can make Harrisburg work again, that he is a deal maker. He hasn't tried contrast with our outgoing Governor Tom Wolf, but I think very implicit in that is criticism that Wolf is not as good a deal maker as I could be, and I know how to talk legislation. I know how to talk legislative ease. He was a state representative, as I mentioned, and that so almost regardless of the rules, Shapiro, I think, really thinks he can drive a hard bargain and get things done, even if he is elected with a Republican General Assembly. If the rules will change, those are set by the General Assembly. That is a cause I know a lot of activists are interested in. It's something that I think we'll have some more to write about in the coming months once we actually see how this election is going to go. And it's a very important topic as well, because Pennsylvania's legislative rules are something that I, as a legislative reporter, am always still having so much fun writing about in all the ways that they can impact the outcome and the speed and efficacy of lawmaking.
And this is, I'm going to throw this out because I don't actually have an answer on this, unfortunately. Somebody asks, an anonymous person asks about positions on farming bills and food inspection services. I don't know. I haven't heard either candidate really talk about that very much. Have you, Steve?
Oh man, I need to pull up. We had a great voter guide come out today on rural issues
Oh, wait,
that
yeah, we can link that in there.
I could just read from, on including agriculture. I mean, I don't know. I feel like if there's one area that most parties do enjoy talking about, it's agriculture. It's, I think, as they like to say, whenever there's a press conference with milk, it's Pennsylvania's biggest industry. But I wish I could give specifics on exactly what policy they're pursuing. So my apologies.
Yeah. And as Constance just added into the chat, rural internet needs addressed. That's been like a perennial topic du jour in Harrisburg. And I think there is broad consensus about improving rural broadband. The question is about funding and also about, the large infrastructure projects that would have to happen in order to actually like materially improve broadband services. So it's a question of funding. I think it's a question of how much the state wants to spend on that and how much federal dollars they can get. And I'm sorry, Constance, I don't know about if we have time to get into elder abuse, because I also don't know off the top of my head what the candidates have said about that. But I do think we're going to wrap up. Anything, Steve, that you wanted to add or note before we do?
It's a very important election. Governors have a lot of power. They set the agenda in Harrisburg. The legislature is going to look vastly different too. Like I said, check back again. But please email us if you have any more questions. We'll have maybe one or two more guides coming out before the election. But thank you for listening and caring enough to hear us babble to figure out who you're going to vote for.
Yeah, thank you all so much for the questions, really good questions, and for being so engaged. Like Stephen said, this is a really important election, and we've talked about this amongst ourselves, but the bulk of our job, we cover the elections, obviously, but we're going to be even busier when the new administration starts, because that is the meat and potatoes of what Spotlight is for, really covering the day-to-day processes of our government. So with that, I will turn it back over to Kathleen for an outro.
Thank you very much. Happy to do that. We are at the end of our time together this evening, and I want to thank everyone for joining us for this rapid fire exploration of voter choices in the governor's race. Special thanks to Katie and to Stephen for their time, their experience, and all the work they did in getting this summary put together. Central to the mission of Spotlight PA is ensuring that Pennsylvanians in all corners of the state, and regardless of their financial resources, have access to trusted, nonpartisan, fact-based journalism. So as we always say at the end of these events, this conversation is just the beginning. And as Katie mentioned, you can see more of our election coverage on our dedicated webpage, spotlightpa.org/elections. Everything we do at Spotlight PA is a free public service. And if you have not yet contributed and are able to do so, please go to spotlightpa.org/donate now. Contributions of any amount help us keep this programming free for all, and your support goes directly back to our journalism. I hope you have a great evening. We look forward to seeing you at our next event, including those events in real life. Take care, everybody.